Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new video. I know it's been a while since I've last put out a video, but I am back and ready to make some more tutorials and more videos for you. In today's video, I would like to introduce you to image processing using R. This relies on a library known as magick, which is a version of the image magick software, which is a software used for image editing using code. This is the R version of it, which allows you to do a lot of image manipulation just using R code. So I wanted to create this introduction video just to get you started with image editing and image processing using R. So first things first, you do need to install the magick package. If you haven't, simply go into your packages, click on install, and then type in magick, and it should be the first one, and then you can install it and you should be good to go. So since I already have it installed, I'm going to go ahead and load it. And then I'm also going to load in the tidyverse package as well. So I'm going to run both of these. And then I'm going to run the tidyverse. Okay. So the first thing you need to do is you obviously need to load in your image. So in this case, I have an image stored over here of Shrek because I love Shrek 2, and I decided that it would be cool to make some image edits to a Shrek image. So I have this image of Shrek over here as a PNG, and in order to load it in, you simply need to create an object. So in this case, I'll create an object called Shrek. I'm going to set it equals to image_read. And then I am going to pass in the name of the file, which is shrek.png, and make sure you have your working directory set to wherever your file is located in, just so that you can easily access it. So once you run it, nothing happens, but you do see that the Shrek object has been created. So if we do look at the class type of the Shrek object, we will notice that it's actually set as a magick image object. So that's how we know that this has successfully been loaded as a magick object. In order to view the image, we can just simply use a print function and pass in the image object into it. And once we run it, we do get the image to our right side in the image viewer window. And then you can also pop it into a image window, which would automatically open up in your default web browser, and it opens up for you just right there. Okay. You can also get a little bit more information from your image by simply using the image info function. And then we are going to pass in the image object into it. And it will give you some information such as the format of the file, the width, the height, the color space, file size, etc. Okay, now let's get into some of the basic image editing. Now, of course, one of the main basics of image editing is cropping pictures, and you can do that using the image_crop function. What this takes is, it primarily takes two parameters, one being the image object and the second being the geometry, and I'll explain what that is. The geometry is simply the dimensions that you provide that you want to crop based on. So in this case, if I were to pass in a 400 by 400, what that means is crop the image using 400 pixels for the width and 400 pixels for the height. So if I were to run this, you will notice that the image has been cropped. Now, of course, you may want to adjust this to your liking. So what you could do is you could actually add a plus sign and add a certain value. So let's say I add 50. What that does is it will start cropping 50 pixels from the left. Now, if I do have a minus sign, that would be 50 pixels to the right. So if I were to run this, you can notice that it started cropping 50 pixels from the left. And then if I were to put a minus, it's going to start cropping 50 pixels starting from the right. So what I found optimal is I do want to do a cropping of Shrek's face, and I found it optimal that I use the pixels starting 190 pixels from the left, and it does give me a nice image of Shrek in a square format that I could use. So that's how you crop an image. You can also crop if you were to add a plus sign and say, for example, 50, what that means is it will start cropping 50 pixels from the top, it will start cropping and all the way down. And then if you put a minus, then it's going to start cropping 50 pixels from the bottom towards the up. But in this case, we can only keep it at this right here, and I think it's pretty optimal. Now, you can also scale the image. So this involves like resizing the image. So if we can do that using the image scale function, we pass in the image, and then the geometry is simply just 500. So that's the scaling of it. So if you click on run, it just resizes the image. It makes it smaller. I believe it was originally about like 747 pixels in the width and 768 pixels in the height. But now it's sitting at 486 for the width and 500 for the height. So that makes it a bit smaller, and now you can see the full body of Shrek. You can also rotate an image using the image_rotate function. So you provide the image object, and then you provide the degrees that you want to rotate it by. So in this case, let's say I want to rotate it by 45 degrees, and then I run it. And what you're going to notice is that it's going to be rotated by 45 degrees, like that. Now we can also flip the image. So when I say flip the image, we can flip the image upside down or mirror the image. So in order to flip the image upside down, you simply type in the image_flip, and then you just pass in the image object, and you run it, and the image is flipped over. And then if you want to mirror the image, you can just simply use the image_flop function, which will just mirror the object. So it is just mirrored right now. Okay, so you can actually add a few fun effects to your image. So you can add some pretty cool filters like a charcoal filter or an oil paint filter, and you can simply do that by just passing in a certain function. So for the charcoal one, you could use the image_charcoal function, and you just simply have to pass in the Shrek object. Now you could also pass in a radius and a sigma. The radius would mean the area that you would use to apply the charcoal effect to, and then the sigma would define the density of your effect. So if I were to pass it in without any arguments and run it, you're going to see that we get like a charcoal effect. Now, of course, with this image, it does have some bumpy edges to it, which is why it shows up like that. But usually with any other images that don't have any bumps, it should just give you a charcoal effect. Let's see what happens if we try to use the radius. So let's say we give it a radius of, for example, 10, and then a sigma of maybe 5. So if I were to run that, seems like it's done quite a bit. It's given it a bit more of a blurry effect. So maybe perhaps bring this to a 5 and bring this maybe to a 2. See what that does for us. Yeah, there we go. So it's made it a little less blurry, but it's giving it that charcoal effect. You can also give an oil paint effect to your image by simply using the image oil paint effect, and then you can you pass in the image, and then you can also pass in a radius. So let's say we want to set the radius to 5. So if I were to run that, you can see that it now has a oil. The image looks like it's been painted with oil. So it looks pretty cool. It looks like a painting. You can also apply a blur effect to your image. We're going to do that using the image_blur function, and then we're going to pass in Shrek. Now, if I were to run this, you will notice that it's not really blurred. So you will have to make adjustments to the radius parameter and the sigma parameter. So with the radius, I'm going to set it to 10, and then the sigma, I'm also going to set it to 10. So if I were to run that, you're now going to notice that the image has been more blurred. Perhaps maybe we can reduce the sigma to maybe 6. If we were to run that, it's still blurry, but it's less blurry, but I think this looks pretty good. If you're interested, you can also do a cool motion blur effect by using the image_motion blur function. Now what this does is it will take your image object, then it will also take a radius parameter as well. We'll set it to 10, and then the sigma will also set it to 10. So if I were to run this, it also gives you like this motion blur effect. So if you look at this, it's a pretty cool motion effect that you can add to the image. You can also negate the colors of your image, which simply kind of flips the colors of your image. And we can do that by using the image_negate, and then just simply pass in the image object. And there you go. The colors have been negated. One of the most important parts of image editing is adjusting your brightness, your saturation, and maybe even making some adjustments to your hue if needed. So you can do that by using one function called the image modulate function. And what that takes is the image object and then also a brightness parameter. And we can set that equals to 100, and that's what it is by default. The saturation argument, which is also set to 100 by default, and then the hue argument, which is also set to 100 by default. So if I were to run this, you just simply get your own image. But let's say you want to drop the brightness, so maybe if you drop it to like 50, and then you run it, you're going to notice that the image is darker. And then if you set it to 150, and you run it, you're going to notice that it's much brighter. You can also adjust the saturation. So let's say you want to bring this down to maybe a 20 or run it. You're going to notice that it gives you more of a black and white effect. So if I bring it down to 0, you're going to notice that the image is in black and white. So, and if I were to bring this up to maybe like a 200, it's going to have too much saturation to it. So I'll bring it back to 100. And then last but not least, you have the hue. The hue in this case takes any value between 0 and 200. So if I were to pass in a 0, it would give you this weird blue color. And if I pass in a 200, it will give you also the weird blue color. So let's try a value anywhere in between. So let's say, for example, 165. And if we run that, it gives you a little bit of a light blue color. And then maybe 130. Gives you a green color. How about, for example, 90? Gives you a bit more of a reddish color. It's getting there. So like if I put it at 70, well, there we go. We have a red color. And then 50, we get a pink, more like a purplish pink color. So you can actually play around with the values of the hue to kind of create some crazy colors to your liking. Now you can also contrast your image. You can do this using two different functions. So there is the image normalize function, and you can simply pass in the image object, and that will contrast your picture. And then also same thing with your image contrast function, which also contrasts your image. Pass in the image function. And then if you were to run that, so you're going to notice that there's some slight differences between the two. So if I were to run this, it has one kind of contrasting, and if I run this, it has a different kind of contrasting. This one seems a little bit brighter for the second one. You can also adjust some of the sharpness to your image by adding a little bit of noise to your image. So you can do so by passing in the image underscore noise function. And then you're going to just simply pass in your image object, and then you can pass in the noise type. But I will run this without the noise type parameter set, just to show you what happens. So if you notice, the image becomes a little bit grainy. So if you look at it, there's it has some grain to the image, and that's what noise does to your image. There are different noise types. In order to navigate the different noise types, you can simply type in the noise underscore types function, and that will give you a list of noise types you could use. So for example, let's say we want to use, so I'm actually unsure which is the default one they use for the image noise. Just to make sure, it actually uses the Gaussian as the default noise type. But let's say for this one, for example, we want to use the multiplicative noise type. So let's go ahead and use that. And if I were to run that, it looks a little bit more grainy actually over here. If I were to use a random, for example, I think that might be an interesting one to try out. If we run it, wow, that is not the kind of noise I was trying to achieve, or not the kind of sharpness. But you can actually check out all these other noise types and see which ones you like, and maybe that's an intended effect that you want to have with your image. So I'll go ahead and just remove that for now. And what I'll do is I'll pipe this into an image enhance function, and what that will do will slightly enhance your image to where it doesn't have too much grain. But at the end of the day, I think there are more advanced ways of sharpening your image. You could apply a convolution matrix to it, and that could be something I introduce in the second part of the image processing tutorials. So we can also colorize our image. You can actually apply a certain color to the image. Let's say you want to add maybe a red filter or a green filter, or maybe not a green since Shrek is green, maybe like a blue filter or some other color. You can do so by using the image colorize function. You pass in the image object, and then you set the opacity value, So by default, I believe it's 100. And then for the color, you can actually give it a color. So in this case, I'll just give it, for example, pink. So in this case, if I were to run it, you're going to see that, well, actually, I believe the opacity, the default value is 0, but since the opacity is set to 100, you're only going to see the outline of Shrek, and it's going to be filled with a pink color. So if you want Shrek to be seen, then maybe we could reduce the opacity maybe down to 50, and you're going to see a little bit of Shrek. So maybe let's actually bring that down to 35 and run that. So you can still see that Shrek is still visible, but then it has a little bit of a pink filter to him. So maybe let's add a blue one. So you can see like there's a blue filter added to Shrek. Maybe for this color in particular, we can make it 50. And there we go. We have Shrek in a blue filter. So that's how you could colorize your images using the image colorize function. You can also add a nice border with your image. Like you can add a background and you can add a border at the same time. And I think this is really useful because we are working with a transparent image. So in order to do that, you can use two functions together. You can first use the image border function, and then you can actually pass in the image background function. And then the background, you can pass in the image object, and then you can also pass in the color of choice. So in this case, I want to use the gold color. Now, if we do just run the image background function, just like that, you're going to notice that now Shrek has a background color. So you can actually fill in the background color as long as you have a transparent background. But in order to add a border, what you want to do is you want to continue adding the image border arguments by adding the color of the border, so which would be green. In this case, we do want to set it to green. And actually, let me see if I can pull out the parameter. So in this case, we have the color. So this would be the color, and we're going to set it to green. And then also we want to set the geometry. And we want to set it equals to, we want to set it 40 by 40. And what this is, it's basically, let me just run this so I can show you what it is. So the first 40 over here would represent the width of the vertical part of the border. And then the 40 would represent, the other 40 would represent the width of the horizontal part of the border. So if I were to, again, we have this run, and if I were to open it up, we can see that now Shrek is in this nice frame with a gold background with a green border. Okay, now let's talk about annotating images. So of course you can add text to your images. So I'll make it very simple here, and I will put in a quote from Shrek 1, which is, "What are you doing in my swamp?" So I'm going to do that by adding the image annotate function. And then I am going to pass in the image object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the text parameter of it. And this is where you just pass in the text that you want to include in your image. And then you want to just type in, "What are you doing in my swamp?" If I were to run this, you're going to notice that the text is really small and it's in the top left corner, but I possibly want this in the center. So in order to do that, you're going to have to set the gravity parameter equals to center. And the gravity parameter represents the position of your text. To see the different kinds of gravity types you have, you can do so by typing in the gravity underscore types, and you'll get all different types of gravity. So the center would represent the center of the image. The north would represent the top of your image, and probably the top center of your image. South would represent the bottom of your image. Southwest would represent the bottom left of your image, and etc. So if I were to run this, you're going to notice that the text is now all the way in the center. Now let's say I want to add a few more effects to it, so possibly I do want to make it bigger, so I'm just going to say size equals to 50. So if I were to run that, of course, our text is bigger, but then I want to add a few more cool effects. So I want to maybe change the color of the text to green. And then also I want to put this text in a box. So you can actually set the box color equals to, in this case, I want to set it to black. So that puts the text in a box that is filled in a black color. And then last but not least, you can also add degrees so you can actually rotate your text. So since it's not really fitting in here, I do want to, well, it is sort of fitting if I do make it a little smaller, but I do want to actually rotate the text a little bit just so that it fits nicely in there. So I'm going to set it to 25. So if I were to run all of this, you're going to see that I have the text in here which says, "What are you doing in my swamp?" Okay, now I want to actually combine some edits and print out the final edits to a file. So in order to do that, let's say I do want to use the edit that I made from the image border function and then the image annotate function. So what I could do is I could just simply copy this function in here, and then I'm going to end it with a pipe operator. And then I'm going to pass in the image annotate function. And then last but not least, what I'll do is I'll pipe all of this into a image write function. And what this does is it will write it to a certain path. So in this case, I'm just going to set it equals to Shrek_edited.jpg. And I will remove the Shrek parameter from here because we are using the pipe, so we will not need to include that in there. So if I were to run all of this, and I look back in my file explorer, I'm going to notice that I have an image over here that says Shrek edited. I click on it, and you're going to see that my edits were combined and printed to one file. So there you have it. That was a quick introduction to image processing in R. I hope you learned something new about the capabilities of R, and I hope to make a follow-up video to go into more depth of image processing. I think there's a lot more with this package. You can work with GIFs. You can make some crazy text edits. You could also apply a convolution matrix, as I had mentioned, to where you can make some enhanced edits to your pictures. And there's a few more functionalities that you can work with. I will recommend that you look at the documentation on CRAN. I think the documentation is very well detailed, but look out for a new video in the future where I will do a part 2 of image processing to cover a bit more of the advanced aspects. And also there's the ability to be able to merge images together, and that's something really important that I would like to cover in a future video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know, and have a wonderful day.